Hi, everybody, and I'm Dr. Jenna Machoki. I'm an immunologist at the University of Sussex, and I'm delighted to be here and introduce today's Women in Science panel, which is hosted by the University of Sussex Scientific Society. Now, the Society plays host to world-leading scientists, experts, and researchers, bringing them to Sussex and making cutting-edge research relevant and accessible to all. So tonight we have three wonderful panelists, which I would like to introduce you to. So our first panelist this evening is Professor Carol Brayne. Now, Carol is Professor of Public Health Medicine at the University of Cambridge and chair of the Cambridge Institute of Public Health, and has the distinction of being one of the most highly cited scholars in the world. So welcome, Carol. Now, our second panelist is Professor Judith Brewer, who is a professor of virology at University College London. She's also the director of the Pathogen's Genomics unit at UCL. And Judith is one of the leading UK scientists chosen for the COVID-19 Genomics UK consortium, mapping the spread of COVID-19. And we all know how important that has been in the last year. And then finally, our third and final panelist for the evening is Dr. Charmaine Griffiths. Now, Charmaine is currently the Chief Executive for the British Heart Foundation, having previously served as the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Cancer Research, and has been in research for over 20 years at University College London. So welcome all three ladies to our panel event night tonight for International Women's Day as part of the University of Sussex Scientific Society. And before we start, I just want to say a few words on International Women's Day 2021. And this comes after a year that we've all had full of many unique challenges. And sadly, COVID-19 has only exacerbated some of the inequalities that our society faces. But despite this, the incredible achievements of many brilliant women have been essential in the fight against COVID-19, whether this is through vaccines, treatments, or public health policy. So to moderate tonight's discussion on these and other important issues facing women in science, I'm delighted to introduce to you tonight's host, Alexia, who is one of our second-year biomedical science students and part of the executive of the Scientific Society Committee. So I'm going to pass you over now to Alexia, who's going to be able to tell you a little bit more, and I hope you enjoy the event.
All right, thank you, Jenna, for this wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexia. I am a second-year biomed student. I'm a part of the newly formed Scientific Society. First of all, I would like to wish you all a happy International Women's Day. So I'm just going to walk through some of the structure that's going to be involved in the event. Tonight's event will involve an open, moderated discussion between our wonderful panelists and our moderator, Catherine, about a wide variety of subjects relating to women in science. It will last about an hour. I wish we had more time to discuss, but unfortunately, that's not very feasible during these times. We will have some questions for Catherine, but we would also like to receive some questions from you. So if you have questions for our panelists, so either of them or all of them, you could please put them in the comments below, in the chat box, and we'll do our best to ask them. So that is all for me. I'm delighted to introduce my fellow student and tonight's host, and an all-around superstar, Catherine Smith, to start the discussion. Okay, that is all for me, and I'll give the talk to Catherine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Alexia, for that. So I think we should begin today's panel on a more kind of open-ended question. So leading up to today's event, we conducted interviews of prominent Sussex women scientists. And one thing that really stuck out to me was how the way that they described how attitudes towards women in STEM had changed over their lifetime. So my question to the panelists is, how have you seen attitudes change towards women in STEM over your career? And if that's all right, I'd like to start with Carol.
Thanks very much. I suppose two of us have got maybe more medical and clinical backgrounds. Medicine, when I started out, was pretty well dominated by men, particularly in the academic environment. And I think to a great extent that does persist, but there have been some huge changes that have begun to change. I mean, the Royal Colleges have had very active ways of encouraging women in careers. And also the funding structures have paid more attention to women's careers. I think there's still a really long way to go, and it'll be interesting to hear my co-panelists' view on this, but there still are very, very serious blockages or barriers and like a cliff edge in the intermediate career stages, even within medicine, where the pathways are clearer and there are ways of going from you can see how to progress through the stages, which didn't exist when I was working my way through the academic pathway, as it were. So I think it's a lot better, but there's still a really long way to go, and it still does take a real dedication. You have to really know that you want to do it to have an academic career in medicine. Looking around me at the university, I see encouragement of women at all stages of the career, but there's a lot of implicit barriers and challenges in just simply making your way through through each stage. It's a very, very competitive environment, whichever discipline you're in. So I think it's better, but there's a long way to go.
Okay. Judith, I know you also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you also have a medical background.
Yes, I do. And yeah. So yes, I would completely endorse what Carol's just said. So I'm old enough that when I was young, training in both medicine and science, that I would actually go to interviews where people would say to me, a woman with children doesn't do very well in medicine, and science just, you need to think about doing something else. So that, one of the great things that's changed is that is just not allowed anymore. And it really did used to happen. It happened to me a couple of times, and it happened to people in the generation before me very frequently. You had to be very strong-minded and very determined to overcome that blatant prejudice. I think I would agree with Carol that what has changed is that the structures are now being put in place. So the laws have changed. There's protection. You can't be asked these things because it's against the law. And that's, I think, a fantastic step forward. There are pathways through. So there's recognition that women have children, that they take maternity leave. There's recognition that, that things need to be helped. Women need to be helped, and other people with disadvantages need to be helped. So there's more of that. The practicalities of it are less straightforward, and it does come down in the end often to the individual trying to work their way through and the maze of obstacles to get through to succeeding. But I think what has happened is that the structures and the protection is much better than it was. It's not perfect. There's still a lot of problem, but at least that has changed, and I would pay tribute to that having happened.
Shall I chip in next, Catherine? So I love listening to Carol and to Judith and hearing their experiences. So I trained as a scientist, and I remember way back when, probably being, I think, if not the only girl, one of a handful in my science A-levels, and that being seen as unusual and not necessarily being encouraged or indeed welcomed into some of the scientific community even in then. So recognise some of that journey myself, definitely. I'd agree absolutely everything that people have said around it. It was really brilliant to see, of course, advances in law and in practice, and structures available for female scientists through their career. And as the first ever female chief executive of the British Heart Foundation, it's 60 years, I'm deeply proud that as an organisation we're continuing to put in place funding that allows women to return to work after having children or gives them flexible support, and I hope that all funders will continue to do that and develop it. I guess the thing that hasn't changed is that we haven't shifted the dial sufficiently. It doesn't take many looks at websites for boards, senior teams, whether they be the executive or non-exec, to see that there is still a huge need for diversity in many forms, including on International Women's Day to celebrate the kind of gender aspect of things. And I genuinely believe that there's a big shift to do for us still to make, both in terms of the real change we're affecting, but also the cultural attitude that it's just the norm. So I think I wish we didn't need an International Women's Day, or it was just for pure celebration. But I think one of the power of having days like this is to shine a light again, say, okay, we're making great progress. We've still got a long way to go, both on gender and other issues, to make sure that we're truly the society that we want to be, and are operating with a kind of cultural acceptance as well as all the technical and professional acceptances that we want. And we're all part of that change. So everyone on the call, because you're joining today, we're all interested in this, we're all turning up to be part of the conversations, we're all making it happen. It's just seeing, I just want to recognise there's still a long way to go, and I'd love to see it go faster.
Oh, great, thank you. I think two of you or all of you had mentioned having children or families in your answer. And I kind of want to avoid the stereotypical, oh, how do you have it all, but I would like to ask, having children can present a unique challenge to women with careers in STEM. So I would like to know what your experiences have been and what more can be done to support women with families in STEM. And if we start with Carol, that would be great.
Okay, yes. So yes, I do have children, adult children now, and I actually think there's been a huge shift in attitudes and the involvement of parents, as it were. So for me, or for what I see in the next generation and the in my teams, is involvement of the fathers or the partners, depending on what the arrangements are, in the bringing up of babies and children. And I think that is a huge change across time. I don't think it's supported enough still. And I think that's, again, it's a bit like the response to the other question, but there's still a long way to go. But I think that there is now the expectation that it's not just the mother who bears the primary role, or one person who bears the primary role of the caregiver to children. And of course, there's caregiving responsibilities for upwards as well as downwards for many women. So I think that's improved, and I think paternity rights and maternity rights are largely observed by academic institutions, so that those rights have also improved. I think it comes back to sort of a bit of your passion for the subject, or the passion for what you're doing. And we've all been in research in our early careers, and you just basically grit your teeth and get on with all the multiple roles that there are, and just try to keep all the plates in the air and hope that they'll keep spinning. And of course, you can't do everything perfectly. You cannot have it all. I mean, in my view, you can't have it all, but you just have to do the best you can, whilst trying to juggle all those things at the same time. And I hope it's better for generations coming up because of that greater sharing. That I know the surveys don't necessarily always back it up, and it will vary across different cultures and different expectations that people have. But I think on the whole, it's getting better.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to know if Judith agrees with that things are improving.
Yeah, I think things are improving. Again, it's the structure. So there's better provision for maternity leave. There's better provision for shared parental leave when children are born. There's better provision for childcare. I mean, when I was having children, I had a motley crew of people looking after. There were no nursery places and that kind of thing. It was, and I think there's also a better recognition. I mean, I used to feel terribly guilty. I had to go back to work full time 3 months after my first child was born because there were no part-time jobs, and if I didn't go back, that was it. That was the end of my career in that particular science. And so I did go back, and I felt terribly guilty. I just felt I was going to be damaging my kid, and but this, I had no choice. And in the end, it did. That doesn't seem to be the case. We know now that good quality parenting doesn't have to be full time. It can be focused, and that's fine. And I think there's much less worry about that kind of thing. I think I agree that there is also much more involvement generally of partners. I mean, I was very lucky. I had a partner who was involved, but I think still many women do take primary responsibility for organizing their children, and I think that is a huge emotional and mental burden. And when I've seen young people who work for me come back even after a year's maternity leave, and find it very difficult to sort of focus on getting their career back up and running, because having a 1-year-old at home and all that entails, going to nursery and getting colds, and especially for people. I mean, in science, you have a lot of people who've come from different countries, and they don't have parental support around. They don't have family networks, and I think that's really tough. And I would really like to see extended opportunities actually for parents. I would like to see it for both men and women, that not only do they get their parental leave for the year after the child is born, but that there is much more support for extending grants, for giving them an extra year to get back up to speed. I mean, it's a pain if you're a supervisor, if you're the lead, everybody sits there thinking, oh my goodness, my project is falling behind and all that sort of thing. But in the scheme of things, those things can be managed, and it's not so terrible. And I think if everybody did it, then, if everybody had the same attitude, then we would all be able to, weather that particular setback of having people on leave. But I feel it's really important. I've seen so many people who come back and they lose their confidence. They just think, I'm not going to be able to cope with all this stuff going on at home, no parental support, no sort of family network to help me. And it needs a lot of determination to weather that. And I would like to see a little bit more for young parents, both men and women, actually. I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Charmaine, did you have something to add on?
So yes, I don't have children actually, but I am incredibly proud of the work that we're doing as VHF to help people who do choose to have children, particularly women, to kind of preserve their careers. And you know what, growing up in my career, I've had the privilege during my PhD and postdoc of working and meeting some brilliant female scientists, some of whom are at the University of Sussex still, which is wonderful, but also seeing them and my peers who are male kind of develop, and seeing the difference in the challenges they face. So I think absolutely I would agree with what's said before around it's great to see more support, more infrastructure. But I know that all of the surveys, all of the data, whether you look at academics and scientists or the FTSE 100 or any other metric, would show that women tend, if not, I'm going to strip out tend, women do pick up the lion's share of caring and home responsibilities. And again, that's on us as a culture and a society to change over time so that it does become more equal, and that women are afforded the opportunities that men who don't necessarily have the same pressures on them can have as well. And I guess one of the things to call out, so one of the things that worries me and keeps me up at night is in the pyramid of academic progression. As the leading funder of cardiovascular research, we fund around 55% of all independent research in the UK. We've literally thousands of amazing talented scientists out there today. And when we look at what happens in the gender differences between men and women from their PhDs up to being, you know, chairs in the most senior of roles, we see a sharp decline in postdoc around women leaving to have children and then not returning. And that worries me enormously, because we're just losing so much talent. It's not the kind of structure in society that we'd, I know, all be proud of. So we're really thinking hard about what we can do to support people through that journey to make it fairer and more equitable and diverse. Because I think without that being, there are lots of factors, aren't there, whether it be visibility of role models and leadership you recognise, advocacy and mentorship for people in positions, and just change, which can be difficult. I think there are lots of reasons why that's going to take a lot of time and effort, but is worth doing.
Okay.
Catherine, can I just ask, can I chip in and ask a question? Because
absolutely.
What's really interesting is that you're talking about the cliff edge, and we do have women progressing. But if you look at where we progress, so I'm in public health, my colleagues around often in the side disciplines, and Judith, you alluded to this earlier on as well. So when I was doing urology, we were recommended not to go into mainstream urology, but to do something which was on the side of it. I mean, obviously you can have brilliant academic careers doing those kinds of things, which are really absolutely fascinating. But there was a sort of tendency to kind of shift you slightly to the side, or to something that was a bit more permissive and allowed a bit more flexibility for child rearing or whatever. And my impression of lab medicine, this is a question to both of you, Judy and Charmaine, is that the lab sciences can be really quite punishing in terms of the expectation, almost the physical expectation of being there day in, day out, looking after the animals, looking after the labs, doing the experiments and so on. And it's sort of like a treadmill, and it will, if you stop, you drop.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And it's you've got to be there, or you know, and you've got to be producing, and you've got, you know, and however much people say, oh well, we now make allowances for women, we do understand that women with children are going to fall behind a bit. The reality is that they don't. And I've seen so many young clinical fellows who've worked with me, who've come back from a maternity leave, have had their headspace completely, you know, they just haven't been able to sort out what's going on at home and focus on, because I mean, all science is a creative process. And so you need the space to be able to think, you need the space to be able to, you know, work at it. And in laboratory science, you not only need to have the imagination and the thinking time, but you also need to have the physical time in the lab when you're making the experiments work and you're actually getting results. It's not just your own endeavors, you know, which I think in the art subjects, it's much more about what you can create yourself. In the laboratory, you have to get your experiment to work. So you have to have the idea, and then you have to get a result that works. And I've seen people become, you know, suicidal when their experiment didn't work, and they just haven't got the headspace to then try and, you know, work it out. And I think one has to, I think what I would like to see is a sort of a kind of understanding that at certain times in your life, you need to be able to tread water and just keep yourself going, but not necessarily have to push yourself to be the top all the time. And that it won't matter if for a couple of years you do that, and then you're in a better place and you can then push forward and do the really interesting stuff. And I think that that's the problem. I don't see that opportunity where people can just sort of tread water for a bit while they just work out what's going on and they get their thoughts back together and things get easier. And I think it's really hard for young scientists. And you're absolutely right that the physical presence that you have to have in order to get the science done is just can be punishing. So probably Charmaine would.
And it's very the physical presence, the energy, the emotional time. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about having potentially been moved into, I can't remember what the word you used was, Carol, but essentially more tolerating, I guess, or a different environments. And I think it is complex because the nature of science, although it clearly changes with tech and advancement, I think there'll always be that element to lab-based work. I'm really impressed and excited by some of the work that a lot of the funders are starting to think about. So the Welcome Wellcome Trust has led a big piece of work looking at the culture of research and what it takes to address that in all its forms, actually, from diversity to behaviours, whether that be leadership, or how to deal with the right kind of behaviours after so many allegations, of course, of bullying or other in academia as well. And I think, so no quick and easy answers, otherwise I'm sure it would have been fixed already, but I think the spirit of actually how do we come at this collectively, and particularly as funders who are often applying pressure, and universities are demanding outputs for often financial reasons from their staff, how collectively can we create an ecosystem that allows brilliant talent to flourish, create a bit of space in the way that Judith, you've just spoken about, so that it allows people to compete equally, because at the moment it absolutely doesn't, for the reasons you've described, and we see that in our data routinely.
I mean, I think one of the things also is that women need to recognise that until it's generally recognised, they need to actually structure their lives for themselves. And so, I mean, I always say to people when they say to me, well, I don't know when the right time to have children is. And I say, there's never a right time, just have the children when you want them, because there'll never be a right time. You can always make an argument for having them until you can get back. Because, you know, what people forget is that you can go through periods when you're really not being as productive as you'd like to be, and then you flourish again when things get better. You know, you don't stop being a good scientist, you don't stop being clever, you don't stop being interesting in having, you know, good ideas. You just can't manage it at that particular time. And I think we've got to somehow build that into science careers, and I don't know how, but I feel very strongly that that's something we need to do, give people the space not to be super productive all the time, so that they have a chance to sort of take stock. And then they come back and they're just as good when they come back.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. I'd just like to jump in with an audience question quickly. So we have a question from Margot. She says, are you aware of the general issue in the feminist world where people use women scientists as a good woman role model to bring down other women? Do you think this is internalized misogyny?
So to be honest, I've never seen examples of that and I could do with reading more. So thank you for that. I'll have a reading afterwards. But in terms of holding up women to as scientists to perhaps negatively contrast against others, that's not been my personal experience. I've only ever seen in action female scientists acting in a way that would inspire or encourage others to get involved. But that's my personal view.
Yeah, I haven't really come across that at all myself. No, I haven't. And my women colleagues we're all, as you know, amazingly supportive of each other, actually. That's been my experience. And, you know, there's the odd person who maybe doesn't get on with, you know, with people don't get on with each other necessarily, but then there are some people who don't get on with anybody. So I don't think it's to do with, you know, women, it's to do with, you know, individuals. And my experience has been that, you know, most of my women colleagues have been incredibly supportive and incredibly, you know, collegiate, and yeah.
Okay. I would like to direct this next question to Charmaine. So I know this is a women in STEM panel, but I just want to ask a couple of questions about, you know, business and that kind of side of it. So you're the CEO of the British Heart Foundation, which is one of the largest and best known charities in the UK. But then only 30% of CEOs of UK nonprofits are female. I'd like your kind of interpretation of why this is.
Oh, good question. So yeah, I'm really, really proud to be first female chief executive of BHF. I actually worked for the British Heart Foundation for a decade before leaving and then coming back again. It's a privilege, very special, magical organisation doing amazing things in the world. And I just note it took 60 years to get to the first female chief exec or chair. Now, sector question. You're right that we could see with more diversity in our leadership as a charity sector, full stop, and that's gender, but also other characteristics as well. And I don't think it's just our sector. You look at any FTSE 100 charity sector research kind of top team, as I mentioned earlier, and you'll see the same kind of traits and trends broadly of seeing something that tends to be male dominated, and probably in the UK tends to be white male dominated as well. So the best thing I can take from that is that we're all part of the journey for changing that, part of being interested in subjects like International Women's Day, part of talking about it, part of sponsoring and mentoring people around us is really important. And I feel really passionately that as a leader you have a responsibility to inspire and support others around you and see the change that you're, to affect the change that you want to see in the world. So in the charity sector, I mean, it's a big sector. We've got over 165,000 charities in the UK of all shapes and sizes doing wonderful work at all levels. But finding ways in which we can make sure that we are representative, particularly of the people we're here to serve, feels really important to me. So yeah, great question. I think we're on a journey. As I'd repeat, would love to see some of this change happen faster, but cultural change is, of course, always the most often intractable and the stuff that takes the longest, because it's all about how we are as people, isn't it? And how we, what the choices we make in our day-to-day lives as professionals as well as personal. So would love to see it faster, would love to see that number being 50-50 and more representative, but it's going to take a while, I think, for us to get there.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned mentorship. I want to pose this question to all of our panelists. I'd like to know how important has mentorship been to you? So have you had a mentor? Are you a mentee to somebody?
I go first?
Yeah.
So I never had a real mentor, but I had people I admired and people I could ask advice from. And one of them was a woman professor, one of the very few. I think she was like one of 2 women professors when I was a young, first appointed in my first permanent position. I was thinking of going down to try and working 4 days a week, because I felt I just couldn't cope, with the kids and all that kind of thing. I just couldn't have. And she said to me, don't work 4 days a week, work full time. Just just take a day off and work at home. That's what, everybody does. And it was such an obvious thing. And obviously now people do, but when I was contemplating that, I didn't know that people could take a day off and work at home. And that was just a simple piece of advice like that. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. She said, don't do that, because they'll get you'll be working just as hard. And in my case, she thought that the where I was working would make me work just as hard, even if I was working 4 days a week. She said, just work at home 1 day a week. And it hadn't occurred to me. And that was a fantastic piece of advice, very practical and very, supportive. And so I've tried to sort of pass that on and try and be, practically supportive. So I do try and meet with, I sort of recently stepped down for being head of division. And one of the things I tried to do was to meet with everybody who'd been a postdoc for longer than 4 years in the same lab, because it's very easy for PIs to just become dependent on a good postdoc. And quite often that's a woman who, for various reasons, is just sort of, it's all very comfortable, the funding's there, and it's probably not that great always for their career. And I try to meet with every postdoc who'd been there for 4 years or more, most of them women, to say, is this what you want to be doing? Is it, have you got a plan? What's your exit plan? What happens when the funding finishes? Why are you not doing this, this, and this, and this? Just to challenge them. Because I think so often women can just coast along, doing a good job, but just being overlooked. And I think, I felt my job was to sort of say, think about what you're doing, because, by not applying for another job, it may be comfortable, but you may not be doing yourself a service. So I've tried to be kind of practical and to challenge people to look at what they're doing, and, so that they can make choices, and they're actively managing their career, not just having it happen to them, which I think so often happens to women, that you go for this job because it's convenient, you go for that one, you don't apply for a job because there's, things are happening at home or whatever. I think it's important that you actually manage your own career and think very strategically about what you're doing. And I've tried to do that as much as I can.
Okay, thank you. Could we get Charmaine's response?
I've been blessed actually with lots of people who've supported me in lots of different ways, whether that be coaches who've helped me kind of work through interesting or tricky issues or opportunities, or mentors, everyone from a kind word over a coffee to something that's been a bit more sustained. And each of them have been incredibly valuable. For the reasons I think that Judith described. Sometimes it's getting you to challenge your own perceptions of yourself, what you're interested in, what you think you're doing. So I would strongly advocate for, or recommend anyone who's interested in their career or interested to seek advice and wisdom of others. It's always been useful to me and I try to repay that in the things that I choose to do in life as well, both in terms of supporting people in my work, but also it's my privilege to be chair of the Cranfield Trust, which is a wonderful charity that marries commercial voluntary expertise with small charities who can't afford it, and also on a non-exec and at the Human Tissue Authority and other boards where I get to meet brilliant people and learn from them all the time, and through those opportunities also try to seek to support others. So I think there's definitely a bit of give and get, but I would, if people, there are lots of opportunities for people, I'm sure, as smart students who are doing smart things in the world, to offer their mentorship and support to people, whether that be through some of the speakers at schools or other kind of schemes. There are lots of great ways to get involved, but also to seek it. I have several people now that I call on as counsel regularly to advise or guide me, and yeah, there's, I think, an incredibly valuable part of life.
Okay, thank you. Carol, can we hear a little bit from you about that?
So yeah, I suppose I didn't, like Judy, I didn't really have a mentor, but and like Charmaine, it's sort of the gentle, quiet encouragement, or just sort of people who believe that who believe in you, that you can do something across time. So it wasn't anything formal, but as part of my early academic career, I set up the Masters in Epidemiology in Cambridge. It was kind of came with the job. So we had to set it up from scratch. And that was the most privileged experience in a way for me, because it meant that we could recruit students into our master's program. And I'd be working with colleagues, and we were then able to nurture their careers. And so from that, I've really gained an appreciation of the value of nurturing careers across the whole spectrum, although not so much for undergraduate, but that's a real aspect, that is a really important stage as well. And the support for students at each stage, and then continuing to support them after they've left, and see them through their careers, as including into very senior careers, has been an incredible privilege, which I'm sure Judy and Charmaine have had as well. And I've been a mentor on various programs, including the Academy of Medical Sciences, and that has formal training for mentorship, and that's also been a different type of privilege, because actually that's people coming in from different fields, and they sort of choose you, and then you form a relationship and mentor them across time. And I think it's as stimulating for the mentor as it is for the mentee. But I think there's a lot about being mentored and coached and different types of support, and there's a lot about being a mentor to others, and you learn so much from both.
I'm really interested in public health, so I would love to ask you, Carol, about so I'd like to ask, how important is sex disaggregated data in public health? We've seen with the COVID pandemic, men are more likely to die from when they contract COVID. So I kind of like to get your opinion on this. And
yeah, well, it's incredibly important. I'm sure Charmaine and both Charmaine and Judy can talk about it, the importance in their fields. It's phenomenally important. And of course, the issues to do with transgender, and there are loads of issues to do with gender and sex that are just can't be swept under the carpet. In my own field, in neuroscience, there's been a real lack of attention to gender, to sex and gender. and the impact, the life course impacts, the whether they're, the interaction of biology and life course. And there's been, I think there's an increasing recognition in the fields that it really is important to present your data, even if you don't think that it's important to present it according to gender or sex, depending on what the nature of the experiments or the research is. But if you don't report it stratified by sex or gender, then there is no ability then to put it into synthetic analyses at a bigger scale, or meta-analyses when you do systematic reviews and bring the data together. You can't really look at the gender effects or the sex effects. And there are certain experiments or certain models of pharma development which are entirely based on male animals. So we need to absolutely basically have it there as a lens for all research. And the neuroscience community, Lancet Neurology, had a meeting in Switzerland some time ago about trying to say to editors, people must report gender or sex in all their findings, or justify why they're not there. As epidemiologists, we tend to just control it out. You control gender out. Oh, we know there's that effect, or it's just this effect. But if you don't present the raw data, nobody else can look at it and work with it. So that would be my view. Is it's incredibly important, and with an increasing recognition that we shouldn't do what we've done in the past, which is sort of just control sex out.
Charmaine, I know that the British Heart Foundation, I believe they've done quite a lot of research into this, and I know that research shows that women who experience heart attacks don't receive the same quality of care as men. So could you comment a little bit on this and what your organization is doing to combat the bias?
Thank you. You're right. So I think there is this agenda lens that affects lots of things we do. So whether it be participation or representation on clinical trials, to make sure we're thinking about things that affect women and developing the best treatments and care, or indeed actually treating people with heart attack symptoms. We know that men and women can present slightly differently and that are perceived differently by when they present at A&E or other. So we're trying to play our part, actually, in terms of making sure that whether it's advocating for the data being presented well, trying to influence how clinical trials are thinking about female and male disease and the progression of disease, and also doing campaigns to raise awareness in lots of ways in lots of places in different communities, as well as across the kind of gender split between things that would put people off seeking life-saving help when they need it, whether that be from a heart attack or stroke or other conditions. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's not just the science of disease that is different for us and has a gender dimension, but actually the cultural or perception of people and how they're experiencing disease, and even people's willingness, like the difference between men and women about the willingness to call 999 even if they have heart attack symptoms and doubt them differently, is different. So there's a job to be done almost at all levels of it, but we're trying to play our part across the spectrum, from research to people looking after themselves as well. But there are also lots of lovely things about being our female communities in particular. So I know I'm just kind of focused on the things that are tricky and difficult. Actually, it's wonderful to see some of our peer-to-peer support networks particularly flourish, and there's some fabulous female communities of people kind of sharing their experience and advocating to help other people around them. So yeah, there's some loveliness in there as well, but definitely a job to be done.
I add that I think it's really important that we recognise the biological bases of difference, of the ways in which men and women react differently to, for example, disease. I mean, for example, in interpreting clinical trials, you in certain areas you'll find that women have more side effects than from vaccines. I mean, for example, in the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, women are more likely to experience side effects, but women's immunology and their immune handling of SARS-CoV-2 is completely different, and women are much more likely to have autoimmune problems than men generally, and so it's quite possible and probable that women are having more side effects from the vaccines because they have their immunology is different. And I think there is increasing recognition of this, but I can remember the times when it was just put down to, well, women complain more. They are more likely to attend their GP. That was the explanation, so that they're more likely to come forward with them, and men will just grin and bear it. And I think it's actually, there is a recognition of that, but we need to be very, very aware of that. We need to do much more research on that to really understand, the differences in the biological differences in the way that women and men react to different interventions. And yeah.
It's so interesting to hear you say that, because that's what my dissertation was about. Got me excited a bit. Sorry, I'd like to pepper in a little bit of a audience question. This is from Valentine. So she says, there's a lot of focus on women getting into STEM, but less focus on retention. How far do you think lack of confidence is an issue, and how could this be improved? Yeah.
So I think lack of confidence, I'm going to dive straight in. Lack of confidence can be an issue, but I think that's where I'd say great mentorship and role models can help, as well as I hope changes that just engender people doing things they love and are good at more and more over time. So I think particularly, so lots of data to tell us that women can be less confident, and there can be more imposter syndrome, particularly in male-dominated sectors and careers, whatever kind of that may take in academia or outside. And that's why I think probably I would urge people to seek support and just people who advocate for you, who help encourage you, to have great people around you to help you get through that. Because I think we all feel it at different places and different times, and clearly, men feel it too. There's absolutely no doubt that's the case as well. But I think women feel it more, and that's where I draw on the emphasis and power of really great support and challenging networks that help you reflect on that and bring some objectivity to otherwise what can be quite ingrained as well.
Mm-hmm. Could we go to Carol next, please?
Well, obviously, I agree with that. The mentorship. I think it will be good if we want more people, more women in STEM. I think medicine is probably slightly more straightforward, but I think we do need to change the kind of working culture, the lab culture that Judith was describing earlier. We do need to think about how we work and the way we work. Because I think it can be very discouraging if you're in a working environment which isn't supportive, even if you have the best mentorship and support around you. If you don't feel that you can do your best in the environment that you're in. So I do think we need to pay attention to how different career people at different points in the career experience their work environment, and see what we can do to try and change the ethos in the work environment.
Mm-hmm. Judith?
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that, there's work to be done with women to make them feel more confident, because sometimes they will feel unconfident for no good reason. And, there's the whole piece around, don't worry about what others think, just worry about what you're doing. Don't think about what others are thinking. I mean, women are much more likely to worry about what others think about them. They're much more likely to worry about making a silly remark in a meeting and that everybody thought they were stupid. And there's a lot of sort of, I find, a lot to be said to just say nobody will remember it. Nobody will remember what you said. They're only interested in what they said. So don't even think about the fact that you made a silly remark and, that sort of thing. But I think there's also, as Carol said, the real practical issues about how to make it work for women and men who just need, they need a bit of support at certain times to be able to sort of work through their own worst fears, basically, and how we structure our working environment to actually support them in this way is a real challenge. I would agree.
So we've got a question from Alex. He says, what would you say to men in STEM who want to help out? And let's start with Judith.
Great. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I think, where you can help is by, doing the sorts of things that I've mentioned, by reassuring female colleagues, by, being, giving them space to be able to, present what they have to do and, speak, not, there still is quite a lot of mansplaining that goes on. I have a lot of that directed at me. I sit in, in meetings and there's somebody very carefully explains to me things that I know already because, they assume that I, don't know. And, that kind of thing. I think just being a good friend, actually, and sympathetic and helping out. I mean, we have situations in my lab where if someone's been on maternity leave and comes back, then they can buddy with another person in the lab who will help them, get back in. We try and have, some kind of continuity, so they have some sort of research assistant to help them while they're off, and they have paid days when there's help for the childcare, so they can come back into work and that kind of thing. But inevitably, when they come back, they need lots of support, and having a male colleague who's been there and has been sort of doing the work all the time and has some continuity of how what's been going on in the lab can be incredibly helpful, incredibly supportive, and I think that's how certainly in lab medicine, I think male colleagues can really make a difference. So, yeah.
Carol, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think it's sort of being a good team player. So in addition to what Judith was saying, it's really sort of ensuring that the team, working together as a team, I think, and playing your part and looking out for other people and how they are, whether it's women or men, and with attention to where they're coming from, and actually the listening. I mean, obviously men will have the male colleagues will have their strains and stresses as well. But if there's a listening and an understanding environment, I think, and mutually supportive, then that really can make a difference. It certainly made a difference to me in my early career, just being able to drop in on a colleague, most of whom were men, and just have a chat, just that kind of simple things, the simple encouragement that we were talking about earlier. And also call things out if you see bad practice. I think that applies to everybody, but male colleagues can play their part in this as well, which is calling out bad behavior. I think that's really important.
Charmaine.
I would agree. I love that last comment as well about treating others as you'd want to be treated and calling out things as well as celebrating it that don't go with that. I would say that I've been blessed with lots of male and female mentors, just brilliant people, actual support and all those kind of things. In terms of treating other people, I think you'd always want people to treat them as you would your loved ones. So if it was your sister or daughter, making or your son or brother, just making sure they were treated in the workplaces you'd want them, for theirs kind of engenders a bit more of a spirit. I'd also say, Alex, well done on wanting to be part of it. Brilliant, go for it. But I'm sure many people on this call be in leadership opportunity positions themselves over time, or have kind of power and decision making. And in that, just to think about it, to be mindful of it, to seek opportunities to give everybody the right kinds of choices, to encourage talent regardless of gender or other, and to use the power that you have and you will have in your career for good for others as well. So I think probably being mindful of it is half the battle. The advocacy and care that we've, I think, all talked about for others is part two, and then using those moments in life where you get to make choices that affect those people around you in the way that you either reward, recognise or encourage them. I think that sounds like a great start.
I think next, I'd like to know what you think the next steps are in order to achieve equality for women in STEM. I know you've touched upon this, but if you could give your thoughts on this, Carol.
This was the one thing, thinking about the one thing that I want to change. I think I would want to have a go at the funding structures to look at the way that money is dispersed. I think we waste an enormous amount of effort in the way that we run our research programs and our academic programs. It's all very ad hoc, and enormous amount of human resource and financial resources expended. And just coming back to the point that Judy was making about there are times in your career when you need to be just supported because you have promise, or and you will deliver at some, soon, but not all the time. We have this very, very competitive model. I'd love to see that change change our funding model, whether we do it in an experimental way or not, and see how that changed careers, because I do think that reinforces. I think we have a major reinforcement of the cliff edge through the way that we structure our research. So that would be my thing.
Okay, I'd love to hear from Judith next.
I mean, I was going to say almost the same thing. I mean, I'd love to see some sort of funding where you could apply for treading water funding for 2 years, where you're going to just do your job, you're going to keep it ticking over, and that could be at any point in your career, and it could be open to men and women. That there's a point at which you're going to be stressed, you're not going to be able to do something, if you whatever it is, and but that you want to continue doing science, and that you have ideas and you will deliver, but you just need a time when you can actually consolidate what you've done, build on it, think about what you want to do in the future, and have recognize that is a big part of people's careers, and that everybody goes through those periods. And if you're unlucky that you're in a job that's coming to an end when you're going through that, then you're unlucky, and you just fall off as Carol said, off the cliff. So I would like to see again some change in the funding structure to allow people to tread water for a period of time until they know that their trajectory is going to go up again. And obviously there'll be some people who don't manage it, but at least they'll have had the chance, they'll have had the opportunity to consolidate, and then if they don't manage it after that, at least we'll have given them a sort of fair crack at it.
Mm-hmm. Charmaine, can we hear from you next?
So I love that thought about creating a level playing field and giving people a bit of time and the support. And as the funder on the call, I'm taking that with open ears and heart, I tell you, and it does keep us up at night. I think what I'd love to see, if Catherine, if we could have that magic wand moment, I would love to see a 50-50 split of senior leadership positions in academia, in research funders, in others, because I think it's something about the lived experience of people making decisions about how to set up funding schemes, or when to be flexible, or how to nurture and encourage talent, that if you have that diversity at the top and have people who bring that lived experience into all of the many hundreds and millions of decisions that make up how we run things, I think you'll get a better result. It will help engender the kind of culture, society and ecosystem we all want to be part of. So yeah, if I had a magic wand, I'd say this is the last International Women's Day, magic wand, 50-50 tomorrow, and we can do something different next year that's a bit more celebratory than trying to work out what we do. Because I bet you $1 million there isn't, or I say $1 million, no one quote me on that as a funder, but I bet you a lot of money that there isn't a parallel kind of universal parallel discussion somewhere happening where perhaps men are equally worried about the issues of kind of raising children, coming back to work. I just don't think we have that it's just the fact we're talking about it is a reflection of the issue. So I could talk about this for much longer, so I'm going to pause. Magic wand, 50-50, last International Women's Day, we're done.
I think that wraps our discussion very nicely. I'm conscious of the time, but I do have a couple of quick fire questions that I want to ask you three ladies. For each one, you have 15 seconds to answer, but don't worry if you go over. I'll ask a question, then I'll say your name. So what book do you recommend? And let's start with Charmaine.
Oh, The Health Gap by Michael Marmot. It's just the most brilliant bit of reading on inequity and the drivers behind it that I've read this year.
Mm-hmm. Carol?
Life and Fate Vasily Grossman. It's about the war. I mean, it's basically an extraordinary story about life and in the Soviet Union, and it's all the richness of life and survival.
Judith.
I would recommend Vera Brittain. I can't remember her Testament of Youth, which I read when I was very young, just sort of, I think, in my teens, and it just inspired me. I felt, this was a really inspiring story of a woman facing huge adversity, but, with enormous intelligence and integrity.
Okay, next question. What scientific advancement in your field are you most looking forward to in the next 5 years? And let's begin with Charmaine.
Oh, as a funder, I'm not sure I can nail my colours the mask that cleanly. I'm really excited about data and data application to treatment and everything for patients. So we just set the BHF Big Data Science Centre in 2019. I'm really excited by the work that Kathy Sudlow and the team are leading there. So I'm going to hang my hat on data.
Okay. Carol, can I hear your answer?
Oh, that's an impossible question for somebody from public health. I'd just love to see the implementation of a life course approach to risk reduction for dementia. We have the evidence, we need the implementation evidence.
Okay. Judith.
I think single cell sequencing of applied in a personalized medicine way, so that we actually begin to look at what happens in the individual cell in a way that can actually give us predictions about outcomes of disease and that sort of thing. Yeah, which I think is around the corner.
Okay, so this last question, not sciencey. Well, it can be sciencey depending on who you pick, but I'm having a dinner party and you all get to bring a guest. So, and they can be any figure from any field of any time in history. Who are you bringing? Let's start with Charmaine.
I knew you were going to go first. That's a terrible question to finish on, Catherine. Any figure, any field. Well, Grace Hopper. So she was the naval commander who was behind the invention of computers. Just an incredible woman. She exemplifies so much of what we've said today is important: caring for others, relentlessly passionate and focused about something she loved. So yeah, Grace Hopper would be my first choice.
Okay, Carol, sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think just off the top of my head, I think I'd say Sheila Sherlock. She was the pioneering liver professor who was, I did my first medical firm with her. She was terrifying, but boy, would she stimulate you.
Okay, Judith.
I'm terrible at this sort of thing. I can't think of. I mean, there are so many women that are inspiring. I don't know. I mean, wonderful women novelists whom I lose myself with, like Simone de Beauvoir, Jane Austen, people like that. But there are also fantastic women in science, and I suppose I mean, I can't think of anybody in particular, but I'm useless at that kind of thing.
It's okay, so am I.
I admit it. I admit that I'm hopeless at thinking of these things on the spot.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this discussion. I'm going to pass it over to Alexia for a few words, and then for her to say good night. Thank you so much. I had a really good time. I hope you did as well.
Thank you, Catherine.
Very nice.
All right, so that wraps up our first ever Women in Science panel. I personally think it went brilliantly. I would like to thank our panelists, Dr. Griffiths, Professor Brewer, and Professor Brayne, for answering our questions, but most importantly, giving us their time to talk about such a vast majority of subjects. And I would like to give an amazing thanks to our audience. I think it is I think it's the most important part of a panel, because it's not only the discussions the scientists have between them. I think it's also the inspiration, the influence you can give to the general public. And I think discussions in science can flourish outside. Well, I hope they can flourish outside auditoriums and lecture halls. I would also like to thank Dr. Jenna Macchiacci for introducing us to this talk, and I hope you're all enjoying International Women's Day. So a little note about our next event. It's going to be next Monday, and we will be hosting Professor Avi Loeb. He is the director of Harvard Black Hole Institute, and he's going to talk about the probability of extraterrestrial life, which is, I think, maybe not a controversial topic, but certainly very, very interesting. He will also be talking about black holes, the early universe, and generally the future of research in space. You could find more information about that and our other events on our Facebook page, so give that a look. And also, please, I don't want to sound like a YouTuber, but please subscribe to our YouTube channel to have more updates on our future events. So for now, thank you again to our panelists and the audience. And this is, I guess that concludes it. This is goodbye from me and Catherine. Thank you.